Welcome back to Axis of Truth on JNS. I'm Emily Schrader here back in Jerusalem, and this week we're discussing the Jew ban in Birmingham at the Aston Villa Maccabi Tel Aviv football match, which I had the pleasure or displeasure, depending on how you look at it, of attending myself. We'll also discuss the fracture on the American right, where neo-Nazis seem to have gained a foothold within the GOP. Can the party leader stamp out this extremism? We'll speak about this with conservative commentator and author Dinesh D'Souza about the challenges within the GOP. All this now on Axis of Truth. Well, this past week, I went to the Aston Villa Maccabi Tel Aviv football match in Birmingham, UK. Not as a journalist, not as a political commentator, but simply as a football fan. Now, mind you, Israeli fans were explicitly banned from this match for absurd reasons, which I'll detail shortly, but I bought my ticket fairly like anyone else in the Aston Villa section, and I cheered for them because their fans support Maccabi Tel Aviv and opposed the ban from day one. And yet, because I took a photo wearing a shirt that said Zioness, the horror, I was reported by someone. Someone decided that a word declaring pride in being a Jewish woman was apparently a threat or some kind of violation. Dozens of police officers and security staff from the stadium descended on me to interrogate me about what Zioness meant. They accused me, falsely, of wearing Israeli football gear in the home section at a football game. The horror. It was absurd. Even Aston Villa fans around me defended me and said that she's done nothing wrong. But the stewards from the stadium refused to listen, dragged me out of my seat anyway. Take a look.
Okay, ladies, who's got the actual Israeli football t-shirt on?
Not Israeli football t-shirt. She got a Zionist.
None of us have Israeli football t-shirt. None of us. Look. This has nothing to do with Maccabi.
What? Yeah, but it's Zionist.
Yeah, but
what is Zionist?
But wait, but it's an organization and it's him. We're not doing Maccabi.
Just bear with me a minute. The report I had was that you had a football top on.
Nope,
Okay?
absolutely not.
Let me check with our controls,
Yeah.
and then we'll find out if you can stay or you can go. It's for your safety as much as anything else.
So this was pure discrimination, and it didn't happen in a vacuum. All of this occurred after the West Midlands police banned Maccabi Tel Aviv fans from attending altogether under the ridiculous claim that they were hooligans after the pogrom that took place against Jews who attended a similar match in Amsterdam. But what they really meant is that they couldn't guarantee Jewish safety in a city where pro-Hamas thugs roam freely. And that is indeed what we saw. Outside the stadium, the real hooligans were easy to find. Hundreds of protesters, many wearing masks in violation of UK law, waved flags of Palestine, even of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and chanted for genocide against Jews and Israel. Some of them held signs that said, "Call the anti-terror hotline if you see a Zionist." These signs were posted all over the city as well, along with others that called Israeli football players baby killers. From the streets, you would have thought that it was Palestine playing a football match that night, but it wasn't. It was just the Jew haters who can't stand the idea, apparently, of Jewish people playing sports. In the end, after I explained that my shirt had nothing to do with football and simply meant a female Zionist, I was allowed back in. But the truth is that the damage was done because this is blatant discrimination. This disgraceful episode shows just how far Britain has fallen. When the West Midlands police literally fabricated excuses and openly discriminate against Jewish or Israeli football fans while ignoring actual extremists on their streets, it's clear that the country has lost its moral compass. This was never about security. It was never about hooligan football fans or racism. It was about hatred of Israel. It was about hatred about a society so cowed by terrorists and mob rule that it punishes Jews for simply existing and wanting to attend a football match. And today I can tell you that I had the displeasure of seeing that hatred up close and personal. Well, our next story this week is also in the United Kingdom and is an example of just how egregious the money laundering has become when it comes to the Islamic Republic. A shocking investigation by the Sunday Times exposed that this week that Ali Ansari, a 56-year-old Iranian banker now sanctioned by the UK for funding the IRGC, quietly built a £142 million property empire across London's most exclusive neighborhoods. And he's far from the only one. Ansari bought more than a dozen mansions on the Bishop's Avenue in Hampstead. It's a street that's known as Billionaires Row, and he did this using a shell company registered in the Isle of Man. He disguised his Iranian identity in doing so, listing himself instead as a resident of Cyprus. But this is not a story about a single mansion or one greedy banker. Ansari went on to purchase an additional £33.7 million mansion for his family, along with 2 luxury flats near Kensington Palace, worth another £36 million. He even had staff quarters attached to each one. All the while, he was allegedly financing the IRGC, the same terror arm of the Islamic Republic behind global assassinations, cyber attacks, the targeting of journalists and dissidents worldwide. Kind of makes you wonder where all that money came from, Well, the UK government finally sanctioned Ansari after his family's private bank collapsed in Tehran under billions of pounds in debt. Officials in London have described him as a corrupt businessman who provided economic resources to the IRGC and to individuals who are working to destabilize other countries, including the United Kingdom itself. And what's truly disturbing is how openly all of this took place. Ansari wasn't even hiding. I mean, he traveled frequently to Britain. He held multiple passports from Iran, Cyprus, and St. Kitts and Nevis, and continued to oversee his sprawling London estates, while ordinary Iranians back home are facing poverty, hunger, and of course, state violence. British intelligence has already confirmed more than 20 Iran-backed plots on UK soil just in the past year. And these operations target journalists, activists, and dissidents who fled the regime's brutality. Yet even as the regime's agents are being exposed, one of its top financiers was quietly living in luxury in London's safest and wealthiest neighborhoods, and many of them still are. This story should really be a wake-up call because it proves that the regime's corruption isn't confined to Tehran. In fact, the regime actually has more influence in London than it does over the Iranian people inside of Iran. It's penetrated deep into these Western capitals, specifically London, aided by financial secrecy, shell companies, and really a lack of enforcement. And sadly, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Billions of dollars stolen from the Iranian people have been funneled through the UK and across Europe under the guise of business and investment. The same regime that jails women, that tortures women for showing their hair, that murders protesters for demanding freedom, is laundering its money through Europe, and in particular, London real estate. While the Iranian people fight for dignity and justice, their nation's wealth is being siphoned off by the cronies who live in mansions, drive luxury cars, and enjoy the freedoms denied to all those back home. Even their children attend expensive private schools in the West, while the regime itself rails against the West. Iran's dictatorship is not only exporting terror, they're exporting this corruption. And until the West shuts down these networks, every unchallenged transaction and every empty mansion will stand as a monument to our own blindness. Now, next up, we have to discuss the now viral video of Kevin Roberts, president of one of the leading conservative think tanks in Washington, the Heritage Foundation, in which he defended Tucker Carlson's decision to host neo-Nazi Nick Fuentes, a video that was nothing short of humiliating and a perfect example of the moral decay within parts of the conservative movement. Now, in this clip, which has garnered now over 25 million views, Roberts called critics of Tucker Carlson a venomous coalition, which apparently I'm now a part of. This video he halfway backtracked on only a few days later, but first he doubled down. All this, mind you, while he was pretending that his argument was that we shouldn't attack those who are also on the right. Now, this is despite the fact that Tucker Carlson has spent the past 2 years viciously attacking other conservatives. And don't even get me started on the vile scum that is Nick Fuentes that he platformed. These actions by Kevin were not courage, they were cowardice, intellectual and moral bankruptcy dressed up as some kind of principle. Now, fortunately, the backlash that we saw from some of the true conservatives was immediate. There was a lot of controversy. We saw figures like Ted Cruz, Mitch McConnell, and Ben Shapiro publicly condemning Carlson for platforming this open anti Semite, Nick Fuentes, warning that giving him airtime wasn't really about free speech. It was about spreading the cancer of hate and racism. Even longtime GOP allies called the episode a grotesque moral failure. But tragically, we also saw that others in right-wing media who chose silence or, even worse, deflection. Megyn Kelly's continued refusal to condemn Tucker Carlson, or even the blatant Jew hatred of Candace Owens, was another display of illogical moral weakness. Now, Owens has repeatedly trafficked in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, blaming Jews for their own persecution. She's parroted extremist propaganda that honestly is completely indistinguishable from that of both the far left and the far right. And she's been spreading unbelievably inappropriate conspiracy theories about the murder of Charlie Kirk. First, she accused Israel. Now she's alluding that Erica Kirk was somehow involved. Yet instead of strong condemnation, Kelly shrugged it off and said she didn't want to attack Candace because she's a young mother. What? You're supposed to be a journalist. That is not journalism. That is enabling hate for ratings and for relevance. This really isn't a hard thing for people to do, to condemn racism. And then, of course, there's Tucker Carlson himself, whose recent embrace of anti-Semitic and authoritarian narratives isn't anything but accidental. Now, his media company was initially funded by Pakistani Iranian businessman Omid Malik. Carlson claims that he and Neil Patel bought out Malik's stake, but the financial records do raise a lot of questions. Now, according to the available records, what Carlson would have had to pay is in the tens of millions of dollars just in difference from the initial investment, and there doesn't seem to be a conceivable way that Carlson could have afforded that, which of course prompts the question, who made up or what made up that difference in funding? Now, perhaps coincidentally, around that same time, Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump Jr., who was also involved in the establishment of this network, Tucker Carlson's network, began appearing with Qatari officials and even attended the Qatar Economic Forum. Now, Carlson's transformation from American conservative to a populist propagandist for the Islamic Republic, for Russia, for Venezuela even, reveals something possibly far darker than political naivete. It's ideological corruption, and the Heritage Foundation's defense of him shows that the right is being hijacked and subverted from within. If the conservatives in the United States cannot find the moral courage to draw the line at anti-Semitism, then they've really already lost the battle for their own soul. Well, following that story and the crazy developments on the right in America, joining us now to discuss the issue is Dinesh D'Souza. Now, Dinesh is one of the most popular conservative intellectuals in the U.S., as well as a filmmaker and an author himself. Previously, he worked in the Reagan White House, and he's the author of the best-selling book, United States of Socialism, America, and the Big Lie. Today, his new film, The Dragon's Prophecy, explores the biblical dimensions of the October 7th massacre and the struggle we see between good and evil. So as you can imagine, this conversation is extremely timely. Dinesh, thank you so much for joining us today on Axis of Truth. Now, you've been one of the most prominent conservative thinkers, I would say, in the last few decades. I want to get your take on how you interpret what's happening right now in the GOP. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of anti-Semites and fringe, isolationists kind of attempting to take over the conservative movement from within. Do you think that this is the greatest internal threat that conservatives or conservatism has faced, at least since the Reagan era?
Yeah, I do think it is. In the Reagan era, there were safeguards and limits to all this, in the sense that you had, I would say, kind of a group of responsible guardians who, again, didn't try to suppress anybody, but made a distinction between free speech on the one hand and either endorsing points of view on the other or allowing them respectability in the Republican Party or on the right. So these guardians were people like Bill Buckley, Irving Kristol, and there were many others. Reagan himself was also part of this. He would have no truck with any kind of naked bigotry of the kind that we're seeing today. And it's not just about the Jews. It's racial bigotry. Vivek Ramaswamy, for example, just posted a Halloween photo of his two kids, dressed up, all, looking very all American and excited to go out and collect candy. And all you have to do is just go down his feed and you see all this abuse, about him being brown and his kids not belonging in America. And so the anti-Semitism is allied with other types of bigotry that are also resurfacing in very ugly ways. And so I think not only is there the risk of chasing away conservative Jews, but also conservative Indians, conservative Blacks, conservative Latinos. I mean, there is no Trump coalition without these conservative minorities that have been moving in the direction of the GOP. So nothing could be more destructive and suicidal, just from a political point of view, to allow this to continue.
Well, the Heritage Foundation, one of the leading moral and intellectual pillars of the conservative movement, they helped shape the agenda of the Reagan and actually also the Trump administration. How did it get to this point with what we saw just in the past few weeks? The defense of figures like Tucker Carlson by Kevin Roberts, who even in that video he released kind of echoed some of these anti-Semitic talking points himself. They've also aligned themselves in some cases with Islamist-backed propaganda networks in some cases. And is this just ideological drift, or is it a deliberate subversion of the right that we're seeing?
This is a hard question to answer because I have known a lot of these parties: Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Bannon, Gates. My first job when I came to Washington, D.C. in 1985 was at the Heritage Foundation. I was the managing editor of their magazine, then called Policy Review. So I'm a Heritage alumnus, you could say. And I think all of this is so difficult to analyze on the basis of motive. It's very easy to analyze on the basis of its effects, which are manifestly destructive. And the motives, I think, vary between these different people and institutions. Uh, so, for example, Candace, I think, has always wanted to be a kind of Hollywood figure. And I don't know if she became enamored with Kanye West, and that was her entree to that cultural sphere, which is actually more important to her than the political sphere. I don't know if that's where she got the virus, I think is what I'm saying. Tucker is a whole different matter. There's been the idea that he's being paid by Qatar, but he's from a wealthy family. He has a large following. He doesn't really need Qatar to pay his electric bill. So it has never seemed to me to be at least an adequate explanation. And yet, Tucker does act like an agent of Qatar, right? In other words, he defends Qatar in his newsletter all the time. Not only that, he's defended Sharia law, which is a very odd thing for him to defend. Societies with Sharia law are a lot more orderly. And he has said that Netanyahu is the main villain of the war with Hamas. So not Hamas. And again, goes beyond disagreements with Israel or beliefs that Israel had the wrong strategy. Now, Heritage is in a different position. I think what's happened with Heritage, to some degree also with TPUSA, Turning Point, they have gone rather deep into the water with Tucker. And disassociating with him is very difficult. I mean, Heritage has been funneling a lot of money to be a sponsor of Tucker's show, and they have sort of a alliance with the Tucker Carlson network. In their defense, or to say a word on their behalf, this Tucker turn is all fairly recent. I mean, I myself toured with Tucker a year ago in Australia. We spoke in a number of Australian cities. Not a word of any of this came up. And so this is all a new Tucker, if I can put it that way, that we're seeing over the last 6 to 9 months. and maybe Heritage is in a difficult position of not quite knowing what to do now that they are. It's kind of like entering into a legal partnership with somebody you discover that they're a fraudster, and now you're like, what do I do now? So I'm hoping that Heritage is actually looking for a way to disassociate from Tucker, but I think they are very reluctant to do that in a public manner.
Now, one of the things that I found particularly disturbing is this idea that you can't criticize someone because they're on the right. And I know you spoke a little bit about Tucker Carlson already. I personally wouldn't even consider him to be on the right anymore. I mean, he was defending Venezuelan socialism under Maduro just a few days ago. He interviewed Pezeshkian, the president of the Islamic Republic, with really a softball interview. And he says that he hates Christian Zionists when his own father was a Christian Zionist. I mean, I'm not really sure how people are still justifying this as some sort of movement on the right. This isn't anything I certainly ever grew up with in any of the organizations I was involved with. So I guess I'm just confused as to why it would even be difficult to condemn for Turning Point USA, for Heritage Foundation, for Megyn Kelly, for many of the people whom I've long admired, in some cases worked with. Why is it so hard for them to say we disagree with this and these are problematic statements? Because that's not cancellation, it's condemnation. How did this happen? I mean, we're seeing people on the right suddenly behaving like the left.
Yeah, and look, I think the roots of it go back to the fact that there has been so much political repression, deplatforming, censorship. You can't say this, you can't say that. A lot of young people have been sort of villainized for being young and white and male. And let's just say that that propaganda campaign, heavy handed as it was, has not worked because a lot of young people went in the exact opposite direction and now began to interpret the more outrageous the thing you say, the more you are giving the middle finger to these elites who are trying to keep you down. This is really the key to understanding the popularity of Nick Fuentes, for example. It's not that people think that Nick Fuentes is, Nick Fuentes purports to be an alpha male. I mean, he's unbelievably beta male, right? He's got this high-pitched nasal voice. He looks like any mid-sized woman could like crush him, to the ground. So he's not exactly an embodiment of like Conan the Barbarian, but he is the ultimate kind of middle finger guy, right? And so if you say something is a taboo, he will say it. And I think a lot of young people are like, yeah. So this is the sort of cultural phenomenon you're dealing with now. The idea that all these young people are sort of they have a coherent ideology, they don't. So I blame the Pied Pipers like Tucker who are feeding them that ideology. The ideology is not coming from the bottom up. It's actually being provided from the top down. And that is why the responsibility falls squarely on guys like Tucker who are, in a very sort of sly way, advancing ideas without taking the responsibility of defending those ideas. Like, I've never seen Tucker say, all right, let me give you 3 reasons why it would have been really good for us to ally with Hitler against Stalin in World War II. It's because, let's just say, Hitler was not a threat to Europe. Stalin was. Hitler wasn't going around invading other countries. Stalin was. Now, all of this is the opposite of the truth. So you can't make that case. So he doesn't bother to make it. He simply brings it out of a guest. He agrees wholeheartedly. He acts like it's a very profound insight that has been suppressed for decades. This is the modus operandi that we're dealing with. And I think what is heartening, Emily, is that when I first went out against Tucker, no one was condemning him by name. People were disgruntled, but they were afraid to take him on, partly because they saw him as too deeply embedded. He's got Trump's cell phone, and he's close to JD, and he's got a massive following. But I'm happy to say that now pretty much the entire mainstream of the conservative movement is up in arms about all this. I think even Heritage is in full-scale retreat, although they're treating it, I think, regrettably, not as a moral problem, but as a crisis management problem, which reflects a real weakness at that institution.
I want to ask you a little bit about the Dragon's Prophecy, your new film. It makes the moral and biblical case for Israel. And unfortunately, today, I think we see Christianity sort of being twisted, mostly by political actors, to justify hatred of Jews or even other forms of anti Semitism, in some cases, even sympathy for terrorists. How did this inversion happen? And what do you say to Christians who are being misled into thinking that this hostility to the state of Israel is somehow an expression of faith?
There's a scene in that film, this is toward the end, where my wife Debbie and I are baptized in the Jordan River. Now, this is a very innocuous thing that we did before there was any of this controversy. And yet, symbolically, look at what it shows. It shows, first of all, our connection as Christians to the land of Israel. I mean, that Jordan River has been flowing since ancient times. It's the same water. It also happens to be the same water in which Jesus was baptized. And so this emphasizes that it emphasizes the Jewishness of Jesus, someone who's raised in a Jewish household, taught in synagogues, bathed in the pool of Siloam, along with the countless other Jews, walked the pilgrimage road to the temple. So, despite the universality of God, and of course Christians believe in the universality of the message of Jesus, nevertheless, you can't deny the particularity of that same God. He chose a particular people at a particular time in history. So, in that sense, God's presence in the world, we understand as Christians, was manifested in a very particular way. I think it was one of the popes, it might have been Benedict or John Paul, I don't remember, who said it is the Holy Land for everyone, but it is the promised land only to the Jews. That's the mainstream Christian position. Now, admittedly, over centuries, there have been renegade groups that have tried to separate the Jews from the Christians, the Old Testament from the New. By the way, the latest practitioner of this dark art was the Nazis themselves, who needed Christian support, particularly in in Munich and those parts of Germany, and so they needed a Christianity, and so they sort of adopted what they called positive Christianity, which was an attempt to kick out the Old Testament or the Hebrew scriptures out of the Bible and claim, in a sense, an earlier version of replacement theology. So isn't it amazing that this exact same sort of doctrine and heresy is back and is being pursued by people who have, well, something of a similar agenda?
Yeah, disappointing, I would say, but yeah, it's definitely interesting. I know your film also draws a parallel between what happened on October 7th and also the ancient biblical wars that we read about between Israel, or I should say the Israelites, and the Philistines. Do you see today's ideological and spiritual battles, even inside the West, not just in the Middle East, as a continuation of that same moral struggle between good and evil?
Yes, I think that in ancient times the battle was fought mainly on the battlefield, and so the Israelites had to put on the armor and face the Philistines, either individually as David did with Goliath, or collectively on the battlefield. Today, it's a more complex battlefield because the battlefield is partly military, as we see in the war between Israel and Hamas, but it's also cultural, it's moral, there's a propaganda war going on, and also the enemies are more complicated. Even though there is even though the Palestinians and the Philistines, that's kind of the same name, they're not actually the same people. They're motivated differently, right? The Palestinians do it in the name of Allah. They are Muslims. They claim themselves the mantle of God. The Philistines, of course, were pagans and worship multiple gods. You also have inside the West this phenomenon of the of a cultural left that is politically allied with these radical jihadis. A very odd alliance. Some people have called it the Red-Green Alliance. It's particularly odd because those two groups cannot inhabit each other's worlds. And God forbid, if you and I were defeated and we were out of the picture and they control the world, I think they would start chopping each other's heads off. Only one side would be left standing. So that macabre, that is exactly what happened in Iran, and the jihadis won. So that's an excellent point. So yes, I do think that it's a spiritual war, no less now than then. Although I think that the weapons and the landscape of the battlefield is broader and somewhat different.
Well, exactly. And that's what happened in Iran. The last question I want to ask you for today, in the Dragon's prophecy, you call for Christians and Jews to return to their roots and to stand united. I think it's more important perhaps now than ever, in particular this week, at least than it has been in a long time. But what does that actually look like in practice? And can the moral alliance between Christians and Jews survive this wave of anti-Semitic, infiltration and more importantly, political manipulation that we're witnessing right now?
The need for it is very obvious, both on the political and on the spiritual level. So, in other words, if the devil, which is the dragon, is resurrecting the ancient enemies of Israel, in an effort to attack not only, by the way, the Jews, God's chosen people, but also what the film calls the spiritual Israelites, which is to say the Christians who are, in the words of the Bible, engrafted onto the tree. So in other words, this is the spiritual case for Jews and Christians to come together. But look, even if you were to set aside the Bible and the spiritual argument, if there's a red-green alliance, it's united by one thing: hatred of Jews and Israel on the one hand, and hatred of Christians and the principles of America and the West on the other. So it's not very hard to see why the hated groups need to come together against the bad guys, right? Against the devil's platoons, if I can put it that way. This is what makes the right-wing effort, the perverse effort on the MAGA right to drive a wedge between Jews and Christians, a wedge between America and Israel, all the more baffling. And I think that even though we could give rational and even secular arguments for why that's come about, in the end, I think that there is a sort of diabolical or spiritual root even to that. In other words, the dragon is operating not only with the jihadis, not only with the cultural left, but I'm sorry to say, also right of center on our own side, sowing the seeds of division and hatred.
And just for our viewers, how can people watch this when it's available?
The website for the film is thedragonsprophecyfilm.com. You can stream it on a number of platforms. And it's also available in DVDs on Amazon and also from that same website. So it's The Dragons, plural, prophecyfilm.com.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Dinesh D'Souza. Absolute pleasure to have you on.
My pleasure.
And now for our good story of the week. For the good, the bad, and the ugly, IDF soldier Jonathan Carton was speaking at a student supporting Israel event in Toronto at TMU, only to have an anti-Semitic mob raid literally the event and assault him. Now, while security was unable to control these violent thugs, Jonathan took action and expelled physically many of the rioters himself. Take a look at this hero.
Caused the damage over here, insulted me, and they broke our own property. So now I'm going to physically remove them from the path. Everyone's not physically out of here. Block it. I need these over here.
Well, our bad story of this week, Birmingham wasn't enough for the freak show that has become the anti-Israel movement. A recent push from countries like Slovenia, Ireland, and Norway shows an effort to expel Israel from FIFA and UEFA because clearly Jews playing sports is just unacceptable. This isn't the first such attempt, but as more countries are joining on this bullying campaign, concerns are rising. Their justifications are that some teams play over the green line in parts of Judea and Samaria, and that there are not what they called anti-racism measures. Now, keep in mind that the Israeli national football team is composed of Arabs and Jews, and the captain himself was a Muslim Israeli, but apparently that's not enough for these obsessive Jew haters. Shame on them. And last but not least, our ugly story of the week. And no, believe it or not, it's not actually socialist jihad lover Mamdani winning the election for mayor of New York City, but it is related. Within 24 hours of the election, one of the largest schools in New York was defaced with swastikas, and Mamdani's response was to condemn the actions, despite his previous anti-Semitic associations and statements. The best part of all of this, however, was that the founder of the pro-Hamas group within our lifetime, Nirdin Kiswani, who's led countless blatantly anti-Semitic demonstrations in New York, was furious with Mamdani for condemning anti-Semitism. She then went on to imply that anti-Semitic attacks are merely false flags and that there isn't a problem of anti-Semitism. Now, keep in mind, these are the same types of people who got Mamdani into office. There's a reason that we saw people like former squad member Jamal Bowman, America Deserve 9/11 streamer Hassan Piker, and of course Hezbollah fangirl Rania Khalik at Mamdani's victory party in New York City. So to see them already turning on their own, it's very satisfying to watch. Sad for New York, though, as the city is definitely lost under Mamdani. Well, that's it for this week on Axis of Truth. Of course, we'll be back soon with more interviews and stories from the Middle East and beyond. I'm Emily Schrader. Be sure to follow me on social media, Emily K. Schrader or Emily in Tel Aviv. And thank you for watching. See you next week on Axis of Truth.